So I'm making this with a couple different intentions, I guess. Um, I think things around the world are changing, and MAID or medical assistance in unaliving is becoming more of a topic. Um, the purpose of this channel is not to espouse or support any lack of adequate care which would lead to that decision. I think it should always come from an informed and honest place. Um, but I also think that on the other side, the circumstances leading it to it should be discussed. Anybody watching this or listening to this, I think there's always helplines. In Canada, it's 988 if you didn't know that. And so it's not an endorsement of self harm. Um, I also want to say for the record that, and go ahead, this sounds very conspiratorial, but for reasons which later on may be apparent, I have never consented to any neurological procedure. I have never consented to any hormonal modification of my body. I have never consented to any behavioral modification program. The only mental treatment I've currently consented to is the SSRIs and blood pressure regulators I'm on, which, for anybody who cares, is one of the greatest decisions I ever made. I am very much pro medication. Um, I want to tell my story as in Canada, where I'm from. The conversation on MAID is becoming more and more important. Um, it's a story of how a lifetime of stalking and various degrees of sexual abuse, vigilantism, and slander, and that sort of thing have resulted in some very severe crimes like date rape and trafficking and a lot of other stuff that I think we take for granted the gay community doesn't deal with anymore. But I've noticed that nowadays a lot of the outright physical abuse we used to put up with has changed trends, and there's a lot of trafficking and coercion and stalking and hatred, especially in the gay male community. If I ever speak about that sort of thing, it's not to the exclusion of any trans people, lesbians, or non binary folk, or anything like that. But I can obviously only speak toward my own perspective. Um, my earliest memories are generally good, but I think I saw what I now recognize as the early signs of adultification. Adultification is a term that I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure was used to describe the way that we would adultify women of color who were the victims of sexual assault by essentially putting the responsibility of let's say, an 8-year-old girl who was being groomed on her. Why'd you act that way? I think fast-tailed is another slang term for it, which, pardon me, I don't mean to borrow any terms, but in my childhood, the adultification began pretty early. Um, in multiple cases where I was being bullied or targeted by people who were older than me, the view was that I had welcomed it by being precociously sexual, or that as a gay man I was just getting ready for what the rest of my life would be. Um, Things were good in my family. My father worked in construction management. My mother used to do advocacy through the E-Fry Association. I remember she worked at this little framing place when we were in Airdrie, Alberta. Um, and a lot of my earliest memories are actually really good. Going out to like KB Trails and the little Festival of Lights in Airdrie, like there was a lot of really picturesque stuff going on. I made some notes on an iPad, which is why I keep doing that with my hand. I have a bad attention span. Um, Early on in my life, my brother Jared, who's no longer with us, started to put on weight, and he went through like 15 straight years of overt medicalization and misdiagnosis which I'm not blaming my family for, although it did later on contribute to what we found out was glioblastoma. I noticed, unfortunately, there was a trend in my family where the response to bad behavior was this little triangle of criminalization, sexualization, medicalization, which in turn takes any leeway in the situation away. Conversations about growth or what to do instead of just talking about what not to do. Medicalization as if everything was something that needed to be medicated or surgically altered or forcibly modified through behavioral observation. Criminalization, which I'll speak about later, in the numerous cases where I was sexually abused. I think pretty much every situation in my life for 29 years where I've been sexually abused, my abusers were able to pass it off as bullying, vigilante investigation, or a security measure. Um, and Sexualization, where unfortunately the overt interpretation of most of my actions has been sexualized to the point where people have made money off of me and people said that it was consenting. People have accused me of all sorts of things which were not true. And even in cases where I was just trying to live, people still found a way to sexualize things. Like if I went and I met a friend, it was because I was doing sex work. If I crossed the street to go to the gas station, it's because I was apparently giving head for money. And in cases where I believe I was date raped, I think that, as I'll speak in the next few videos, people decided that that was either consensual or I don't know, hazard of the trade, whatever you want to call it. um, Around when I was like 5 or 6, I had just started going to school, and um, my mom caught me and another young boy who was very close to my age. We were doing the stupid thing that kids do: you show me yours, I'll show you mine. And I remember being put through like several weeks of this really weird therapy program where I was pretty much coached to say that like gay sex is wrong and that I was abused, and it like ripped apart his life and my life. And I was given these weird little Christian sponsored books on like sexual anatomy, and I think that really fucked up my brain for a while. Around the same time, my parents were investigated by CPS. On paper, the reason was Munchausen, but I strongly believe actually that I and the other kids in the neighborhood was the reason it started, and I believe that my brother's misdiagnosis in the medical field led people to falsely claim that my mother had Munchausen, which also ripped us apart. I can confidently say that even though I wish they'd allowed me to speak in that investigation more, that my mother does not have Munchausen, and I don't believe that it was ethical what CPS tried to do. Um, I remember we went to go visit my father and my mother because they had just divorced, and we got back from the plane ride to land with my mother and resume normal life after visiting my father. And the police were there waiting for us, and they just basically said, "Oh, yeah, your parents are under investigation. You're gonna go live with these people for a month or two." And they were very kind. I remember that they had these little things that looked like petri dishes. They were like clear little ramekins, and they gave us this like lemon meringue crumble that was really delicious. And they had this other little Filipino girl named Tatiana or Tiana that they were taking care of. And they had a trampoline in the backyard that me and my brothers bounced on. I remember I was trying to turn on the ceiling fan in the bunk beds they had, and I accidentally ripped it out of the ceiling. And then my big brother Josh took the blame for it, which, thank you for that, actually. That was sweet. They eventually decided that the investigation was not due or not proper, and they returned us to my mother. And after that, I think to get away from Alberta, we moved to Beaver Harbor, a really small town in New Brunswick. Um, Beaver Harbor is one of those places where, just like a lot of the country, there's a lot of rednecks and a lot of abusers and a lot of drugs, but there's still some really, really good people. Um, Beaver Harbor is on the Bay of Fundy, which, if you Google it, has some of the most beautiful views in Canada. The fog there would sometimes get so thick that if you put your hand in front of your face, you wouldn't even be able to see it. I used to go out in the water when it was really foggy, and I'd sit on the rocks, and it would just feel like you were lost. Like there was just this cold water up to your knees and nothing else, and you would become one with the fog. As tacky and gay as that sounds, that's exactly what it felt like. There was forests and little cliff sides, and the beach was in my backyard, and those are some of the best and some of the worst moments of my life was in that little town. Um, Going into it, I didn't realize how much of a trend in my life it would become, where a lot of the boys who were my age or older were struggling with sexual abuse at home and closet homosexuality and closet bisexuality and rampant white trash homophobia. So a lot of abuse started when I was in Beaver Harbor, usually abuse that revolved around sexual abuse and humiliation and boundary violations. And unfortunately, when you're overtly gay, people kind of think, well, if you're acting queer, dressing queer, sounding queer, it must be a sexual invitation. So a lot of the abuse was routinely passed off as though I had asked for it, um, which I think from the ages of like 6, 7 onward starts to radically alter the way your brain perceives how you can defend yourself, whether you should defend yourself, whether you have the right to defend yourself. Even today, in places where I've been like overtly confronted or abused, like people screaming in my face or throwing stuff at me, I often feel like I can't stand up for myself. Like, even telling someone to F off means that I'm bad or manipulative. Um, there was one time in Beaver Harbor where I was invited up the street to play on the trampoline by two boys who were like 4 or 5 years older than me. After getting on the trampoline, they pinned me down. One boy, who I'll call R, pulled out a pair of his younger sister's panties and shoved them down my throat. I managed to get free, ran home, and the response from my family was to hold the phone away because I desperately wanted to call the police. They were pretty horrified at what they'd done. Like, as soon as they had like processed it, they chased me back down the hill toward my house and they told my family what had happened. They literally confessed, but still I wasn't able to get access to the phone and call. It's taken me a while to accept that. I think in conjunction with my earliest memories, this has really made me feel like it's bad for me to speak up about any type of abuse that I went through. I also want to say that no one should ever blame or hurt or attack my family because even though they've messed up, I've messed up too, which I'll talk about. And I think one of the main goals of sharing this story as the MAID program gets closer is I support the little hashtag #MeToo movement, but it's always been incomplete. And the amount of hatred and doubt, and in some cases, further sexual abuse that I've received when trying to find my voice against people who've sexually abused me, including, unfortunately, certain female people who've abused me. I've never in my entire life had more hatred, doubt, and abuse come at me than after I started talking about that. Um, and knowing all these different men in my world and around me, it really scares me that there's this whole epidemic of us where even talking about it makes people violently hate you. They want you to disappear, they want you to die. Even if they find out they were wrong, and even if they, as I'll talk about later, come across footage or evidence of you being abused, it will be swept under the rug. Even if you've repeatedly made it clear you did not consent, repeatedly made it clear you need help, even if you've repeatedly made it clear that there's no possible way for you to fight back unless someone on the witness side speaks up and tells the truth, even if you've made it repeatedly clear that your life may depend on it, a lot of the time, if you're a dude, gay or straight, black or white, it's not gonna happen, which I still don't know how to feel about, but it's very real. And I'm never going to say that it's easier for women, it's not. But I also can't make an extended commentary on women or trans people or feminine people. I really can't. So I'm just going to leave that aspect there. I'm not saying men or women have it worse, but I do have to talk about this from a men's perspective because I think it's not 2010 anymore, guys. We really can't keep pretending that abuse and violence is something only women face, and we can't keep calling every person who identifies as an MRA or a men's rights activist, we can't keep calling them all misogynists. It's really irresponsible. If you're inclined to say that men's rights is a rightist issue, a conservative issue, or a misogynist issue, I want you to remember that black men are men, gay men are men, trans men are men, disabled men are men. Those are the people you're sweeping under the rug. And yes, straight, cisgender, white men are also men, and you're sweeping them under the rug too. I don't care if they vote for Trump or Biden. Um, Beaver Harbor was a sort of case study in a lot of what I would later go through. R, one of the two boys who assaulted me on the trampoline, has a younger sister who I'll call M. Um, M once asked me what a period was, and I explained it to her because I thought, oh God, your mom hasn't told you what a period is? And after explaining to her what a period was, her older brother and the rest of the harbor kept calling me a PDF file for pretty much the rest of my time between the ages of like 6 till 10. And it was pretty stupid. I remember one time M and her older sister, who I'll call E and M, came over to chill with me at my house. And this part's really funny. I could see how it could be misconstrued, but I found my mom's vibrator. And I just thought it was so funny because I was like 6 or 7, right? So I found my mom's vibrator in the drawer and I showed them both, and we thought it was so funny. Which, in retrospect, okay, that's totally messed up, but also it's hilarious. Like, objectively, that's hilarious. Some kid finds his mom's vibrator, has no clue for the mental or emotional context of it, so he pulls it out in front of his friends and then they shove it back in the drawer and pretend it never happened. That's really funny. But of course, me being more openly gay, they of course giggled about it, we laughed about it, and then a week or two later, that was another reason for their oldest brother, to keep calling me all kinds of bad words, which precipitated the rape on the trampoline. Um, and it was a bad place, but it was a good place too. The smell of fish guts is something that I think every single person who's grown up in the coast or close to the water can tell you about. It's disgusting, but it becomes nostalgic. Same with the paper mills in St. John, actually. Um, I think that one of the reasons talking about the early childhood thing is so important for me, and it's something that I'm starting to see increasingly more in men's spaces, and I don't mean gay spaces, I mean men's spaces, is that especially with the internet age, mistakes you make before the age of 10, mistakes you make before the age of 20 can follow you for the rest of your life. And there's this bizarre trend that no one's talking about, and it sounds so niche. It sounds so arbitrary and small and specific, but it's not. It's everywhere in North America, where women, okay, and I'm going to be honest here, women who hate men, sexists, we're going to call them sexists, I'm sorry, female sexists frequently have a thing for male sexual abuse. So they'll partner with bisexual men who get off on sexually abusing men. These female sexists will collect data, evidence, accusations on men who they find appealing, and this has happened several times in my life, so bear with me. And they will have their boyfriends, usually boyfriends with access to drugs, organized crime, weapons, whatever, to assist them. They will play victim to the third man, the victim, until eventually, as happened in my case, these female led hate groups with these abusive bisexual men with a background in technology, weapons, drugs, whatever, will organize stalking, trafficking, or assault on the attended victim. Now, when we talk about women who've been abused, we usually bring up the fact that women like sex workers, women who've done drugs, indigenous women, whatever, are usually chosen because they have a bad reputation, because they've done stupid stuff, and because nobody will believe them. And the rate at which the demand for male human trafficking and the rate at which male grape porn is exploding, a huge driver is, I'm sorry to say, but I have to be honest, these groups of bisexual men and women, nothing wrong with bisexuals, who get off on watching men be voyeured, humiliated, abused, raped, drugged, whatever, because they know that on the surface level you can lure a victim in with the comfort of female friends. And then, of course, your closet bisexual bully boyfriend or husband gets his rocks off on abusing you. And if you try to stand up for yourself, you're a misogynist. Um, it's kind of weird, actually. Most of the women that I've met that were born after like 1998, 1999 have openly admitted to me that the majority of porn they watch is BDSM themed gay porn, which on its own, girl, go have your fun. You know, me too, hey. But like at the same time, the fact that almost every single girl I know born after like 1998 almost exclusively watches gay BDSM themed porn is a bit of a tell to me on a direction we're taking in society. And in the next few videos, I'll explain how that sort of unfolded and kind of coalesced with certain other abuses that were set up in my childhood. Um, I think that I don't want each video to be long, but what happened is around the age of 9 or 10, there were these wharf cats in Beaver Harbor, which is a different weird segue, but just wild, formerly domesticated cats that escaped, got loose in the harbor, and they'd have kittens together, and the kittens would grow up all feral and diseased, and I got attacked by one. We couldn't find the original cat to test it, so I had to go through a round of precautionary rabies inoculations and vaccinations. Some of them were purple, some were clear. She gave me the wrong inoculation. It was a big thing. And then out of nowhere, my father suddenly showed up and he was like, hey, why don't you come live with us in Ontario? And all of a sudden, my whole family has a bunch of money, and then no one wants to explain the origin of. And so, being in Mississauga, away from Beaver Harbor, New Brunswick, Mississauga, Ontario, is like, okay, I just had people graping me and, you know, threatening me with death at the bus stop in the morning. And now I'm living in Mississauga where it's not only okay to be gay, but it's cool to be gay. I'm seeing attractive men holding hands in the street. I have a computer in my own room. Like, it was great. But unfortunately, I think that having so many cases where I was vilified after being sexually abused and desperately needing an older sense of guidance in my life that I did not have, and I'll be honest, some of the people in my family being closet bisexuals themselves made every conversation about manhood and growing up and self defense and personal boundaries a very uncomfortable one that nobody wanted to have. At around the age of 12 or 13, because of LimeWire, everybody remembers LimeWire, and online chat rooms, I started to speak to older people, which now that I'm older and I know how like Wi-Fi ownership works, my whole family knew that I was being groomed, and they knew that these older people were sending me progressively worse and worse things. But this is where that triangle of criminalization, sexualization, and medicalization occurred. It went from being a welcome member of the family to people making jokes about rape in prison at the dinner table to just a lot of weird conversations about slow poisoning, and it got weird. And my middle brother Jared, who was like my only real friend, I had so many memories of playing Final Fantasy X over and over, Metal Gear Solid with him. Everyone else but Jared just kind of started to distance themselves from me. Um, I didn't know it, but the people I was going to high school with at Cawthra Park in Mississauga, well, closer to Etobicoke, Port Credit area, had not only begun to bully me online and go out of their way to stalk me and try and con information out of me, but also that several of the older men who I was speaking to, who I was performing for on webcam, were also selectively documenting our conversations and they were playing it off to the rest of the world like they were this cunning, maverick, unexpected investigator that was getting an early childhood predator to confess his darkest sins. Meanwhile, these were the men who were performing for me on webcam and getting me to perform for them on webcam. All the while, my mainly white, mainly female friends who were openly fantasizing about seeing me in sub and dom positions were also getting together in groups to speculate about my mental health and call me a criminal, which that was like 15 plus years ago, but the effects of that online stalking are something I'm still uncovering to this day. I think, as abrupt of a beginning and end for the first video as this may be, one thing that I want to put forward, which is unfortunately probably going to be the opening and closing theme of my life, is that the same people in my life who want to use me as a guinea pig for data and security and prediction, the same people who want to profit from my sexuality, the same people who want to have violent non-consensual sex with me or consensual freaky stuff with me, are often the same people who are attempting to criminalize, monitor, imprison, set me up, or abuse me. And I love that LGBT people are getting more acceptance, but I honestly want people to stop and question, if the same people who want to use you for a research experiment, put you in prison, rape you, are the ones who turn around and say that they're accepting of you, if the same people who fetishize your pain are the ones who turn around and say that you should be criminalized for your pain, then is that really acceptance, or are we just in a state where we have higher street value? So I hope that whoever you are, if anybody ever sees this, you're safe. I hope you get the help you need. Call 988 if you're upset or hurt. Don't hurt yourself, that's not the answer. And ask yourself that. If the same people who want to use you for a security project, or the same people who constantly say you need to be monitored for criminal activity, keep walking away with your money and keep walking away with your nudes and keep walking away after having raped you, I don't think that you're being monitored for security purposes. I think you're being trafficked under the guise of security. And I don't like that we're finding more excuses to do that to men. Please stay safe and have a good one.